Hello, I'm Heather Nelson, and I'd like to welcome you to the wonderful and colorful world of soft pastels. Now, if you're a beginner and you're looking at all the amazing supplies out there, it can get really overwhelming. So I'll give suggestions for those of you that just want to jump in and get like the best art supplies that you can afford. And then I'll also have some pretty creative uses, which I will let you know about in this video, or if you are on a tight budget. Before going shopping for pastels, ask yourself, what kind of art do I want to create? Looking to go really painterly in your work. So like if you're looking like kind of a style like this lion that I did here, then you're needing fairly big marks. You want to make big sweeps. Big marks call for chunkier pastels, like half or full sticks of like miscellaneous or unisons. I choose my pastel pencils when I want to work on a smaller, like tighter project and when I want to do a little bit more detail. I did create this project entirely with pencils. It really eats up your pastels quickly, and there's only so much pastel located inside one of these pencils. If you're wanting to work on bigger projects, or maybe you're wanting to be a little bit more thrifty, then that's where things like your soft pastel half sticks come in, because you can cover a lot more paper ground with these than you can with the pencils. My favorite pastel pencils right now are the Carbothello Stabilo. So that's these guys right here, Carbothello Stabilo. I'm not sponsored by any of these products. I'm just saying what I use. So say in that background, when you're working with something like a pastel pencil, it feels like you're wasting a lot of pastel. Whereas if you have a soft pastel, like a nice half stick or a full stick, you can cover that distance really easily. And then another way to cover distance really well is with a pan pastel. They actually kind of almost look like a little makeup pan, and they're actually even applicated with something that looks a lot like a little makeup applicator. But you can cover a lot of ground really easily with these because there's a lot of pigment contained in one of these pans. I really love it in backgrounds, for example, and I use it in underpainting. So as my foundation to my paintings, I like to use the pan pastels, but I don't find they have the vibrant color that I really want to see. One big advantage pan pastels have is that you can mix them just like paints. So let's see what happens when I put a red down, and then I'm going to add some blue to it. This way we don't have to have all the colors of the rainbow because we can mix all the colors of the rainbow. So there I'm making a purple, and I can even lighten that up by adding some white to it. So now I've got a light purple. So it just becomes like mixing paints. Even though each individual pan seems kind of pricey, it's going to last you a long time, and then you can mix up whatever colors you want. So I really like my miscellaneous. I'm using those the most these days, but I also quite like the unisons, so I'll show you my unisons. I've got the animal set of unisons. Now, they're all busted up because my cat freaked out, went flying off my table, and he sent my pastels everywhere. But actually, these little shards, when you have shards like this, you can really cut in like a nice fine edge and detail, so it's actually almost like having a pencil. So that's why I think if you're just starting out, you don't really need to get pencils if you don't want to have too many supplies, because you can use your shards. And they're actually a little bit more vibrant in their pigment. Oil pastels and chalk pastels, not the same. And oil pastels are kind of more greasy, which is sort of what you'd expect because it's oil. And soft pastels seem like chalk, but they aren't actually chalk. Then we have the Prismacolor nupastels. Now these are quite a hard pastel. They come in like stick format. Again, this is another set that my cat completely obliterated. So that leaves me with lots of different sizes to pick from, lots of different like really sharp edges that I can work with, which I really love for creating detail. These guys are really multi-purpose, I find, because you can create those really sharp edges and those details, but then you can also like lay it on its side and give it like a good scrub and actually cover ground that way. When you want to be really thrifty and clever about collecting all the colors of the rainbow and you don't have a lot of finances or you just want to be careful about it, then see what you can find used. I think this is like a vintage set. It's kind of a fun box. They're called Grumbache. I don't know what the story is on these little guys, but I got that for free from a friend who wasn't using pastels anymore. And hey, they're fun. There are lots of different colors. I actually got quite a few sets from there. I got this vintage wooden box set of Rembrandts off Facebook Marketplace with all these colors. How much fun is that? And it's dirt cheap. I think it was like $25 Canadian for that whole set. But they're barely used. And I can just use this also lovely box. So how handy is that? Pastels have different firmnesses. Something like the Nupastel by Prismacolor, these are quite firm and they're very good that way for detail, right? Because they're almost more like a pencil. They're just such like a wedge, right? But they're not going to go on all creamy like butter. The unisons, right? Unisons are going to go on creamier, softer. Same with the senneliers. Right, the senneliers are going to go on like really nice and soft. They're going to have very vibrant coverage. And then when you've got something like your pan pastels, those go on even more like a powder. It's kind of like spreading powder across your canvas, so to speak. Rembrandt is harder as well. Again, I think working with a Rembrandt is almost more like working with a pastel pencil in terms of its hardness. And you can feel the difference even when you're holding them. They just like, these ones feel, this is unison, feels more soft and creamy, and then this one feels like firmer. It's more like a little bit of concrete there. And so they have different effects, which is why you need them all. But anyway, if you're going to start out with them, then I think you want something that's, you know, fairly like middle of the road so that you can kind of cover the most ground. And that's where I feel like the Sennelier does a good job. It's soft, but it's still firm enough that I can get details down when I need to. But also if I'm using like a unison shard, I can get a lot of detail there too. So there's a lot of options. When it comes to paper, paper is definitely not created equal. So this lion is done on the Pastelmat. I feel like Pastelmat is one of the best papers out there. There aren't that many papers that can even really compete with Pastelmat in terms of just how many layers you can get down. If you're not happy with your painting, you can just brush it, wash it off, let it dry, and then you can reuse Pastelmat again. So a lot of other papers are just going to turn to mush if you try to do that. You can get so many different colors down, so many different details. I just love Pastelmat. But I do have a very budget-friendly option for those of you who are very DIY minded, and that is this. This is actually done on automotive sandpaper, like as in for vehicles, for cars. If you look at the back here, it says electro-coated highest quality waterproof paper, and it's got a 1500 is our grit, right? So that's it's a very soft paper. This is also just sandpaper. It's Gator Premium Finishing P220. That's got a lot more grit on it. Like a UArt paper, which is actually made for pastels, has a very sandpaper-like feel. And that is very much like what you're getting with something like this. Let's just make a mark on this sandpaper. So look how well that mark went down. And when you're looking at buying a sandpaper from a hardware shop, we're talking about pennies per sheet, whereas when you're looking at buying something like Pastelmat, we're talking more in like dollars per sheet. Another low budget option for paper would be the Strathmore mixed media. You're not going to get a lot of layers on this, and it's also going to leave kind of there's a kind of interesting texture if you like that. This is just out of my sketchbook, so don't expect it to be amazing, but if you look really closely, you can see that there's like these little gaps in the pigment, and so that's something that I would really have to blend out. But at the same time, I mean, it got the job done, and that is also very reasonably priced, and I think one of the best things is just easy to source. Like, you can even get this paper at like local office supply shops. We don't even have a dedicated art store in my town. I'd have to drive an hour to get to the nearest art supply shop, and with my head injury, being in a vehicle, that's too much movement, too much going by. So I've had to be pretty clever about how I source my art supplies. Do you have access to art supplies in your town? I'd love it if you'd comment below and let me know what kind of art supplies you can get and what kind of art supplies you enjoy working with. You can also subscribe to this channel or like this video. You can hit the bell so that you get notified when I release a new video as well. The Pastelmat comes in these like sketchbooks. I have seen this exact book range from $55 Canadian all the way up to like $120 Canadian on Amazon. So if you keep an eye out, you're going to see when it goes on sale, and whenever it goes on sale, I snap it up. However, you can also buy Pastelmat in quite large sheets, and then you can cut it up to the sizes that you like, and that's a fairly economical way to go. So you want to see if it's something that you can get flat shipped to you. As pastel artists, we like to use toned papers, so we don't tend to work on white paper very often. Usually it's anywhere from like a tanned brown to some sort of mid-gray, sometimes even dark gray. The color that's down below will sometimes come through your pastel and you can use it to enhance your painting. But pastel is going to cover whatever you have down below, so you don't need to panic about what color you have available to you. Now, whenever you're doing art, there's always going to be like other miscellaneous supplies that you need. I like to use painter's tape because it's removable and I can easily like tape my art projects down so that they're not going to be wiggling around on the easel or on the table. I always like to have a cloth. Pastels will get kind of gungy and dirty, right? They'll get covered in things, and so I give them a little wipe down. Speaking of cleaning, your hands are going to get dirty as a pastel artist, so you can wear gloves if you like. Often use wipes, so either makeup removing wipes or you can have baby wipes. I really like to sketch with vine charcoal because it's easy to cover up with pastel and you're not going to see it. So that's easier than graphite, which I find you do see underneath. It doesn't cover very well with pastel. I made that mistake. If you're working with pencils, ta-da, then really the easiest way to sharpen is with a good sharpener. I like the swordfish, works really well for me. And for me, it's actually lasted a really long time in terms of the blade sharpness. I know some artists really just go through them really fast, but maybe I'm not using my pencils that much. But anyway, it does a great job. That covers the miscellaneous things that I like to use as an artist. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you'd like to see a paint-along tutorial in pastel of an orange, then you can check out my tutorial video.